Okay, now we're about to look at the second reading for Mass, the one from 2 Corinthians, and Mike Bradley is going to take us through that. And while he's doing that, if you'll write down any word, any phrase that strikes you, or any image that comes to your mind. Okay, it's all yours, Mike.
Father, give me a second here. Somebody's talking to me on my program for some reason. Okay, there we go. It was trying to read it for me.
Oh,
Too much technology here. Okay, hold on. Real quick, let me get right back.
so you have an electronic lectionary?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's very simple. It's not a lectionary, but it's the missal online.
Okay.
It's just called missal.
Okay.
And it has all the Sunday readings. It doesn't have the daily readings.
Okay.
So it's pretty handy. I just read out of that. And I have the lectionary too. I always use that as a backup.
Okay.
So, but this one's a lot easier to use for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Second reading, 2 Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, we're always courageous, although we know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. Yet we are courageous, and we would rather leave the body and go home to the Lord. Therefore, we aspire to please him, whether we are at home or away. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each may receive recompense according to what he did in the body, whether good or evil. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Okay, and be sure to unmute yourself. And if you have any words, phrases, or images that struck you.
Walk by faith, not by sight.
Walk by faith, not by sight. Okay, I'll go ahead into my presentation. I got some background information from Raymond Brown's Introduction to the New Testament. The most likely date for 2 Corinthians is in the late summer or early autumn of the year 57, and most scholars think it was written from Macedonia, which would be northern Greece in today's geography. The authenticity, by authenticity, scholars mean, did Paul himself really write it? Brown says this is not seriously disputed. Almost all scholars agree that Paul wrote this material. Unity. Most scholars think that several letters have been combined, letters that were originally sent on separate occasions. Some scholars think that there were 2 letters that were combined. Others think that as many as 5 different letters have now been combined into what we call 2 Corinthians today. Unity, and integrity. That is, did Paul write all of it? Some scholars think that the verses from chapter 6:14 to chapter 7, verse 1, which is an exhortation not to marry unbelievers, they think that this is a non-Pauline interpolation, that somebody, some scribe or somebody wrote this onto the letter, but Paul did not write it himself. So Brown gives a brief outline of the contents. It begins with an address, a greeting, and thanksgiving, and this particular one stresses Paul's sufferings. And then part 1 of the letter is his relation with the Corinthian Christians, and he mentions a tearful letter. And then in chapter 1 and 2. And then after that, he goes on to describe his ministry from most of chapter 2 to the beginning of chapter 7. And then part 2 of the letter is about Paul's collection for the church in Jerusalem, which is chapters 8 and 9. And then 10 to 13 is Paul's response to challenges to his apostolic authority. And he uses some very, very sharp language against people who are challenging his authority. And someone has said, does he really expect people to donate to his collection after he's ranted and raved at them? So that's one reason why people think that we have different letters that were written on different occasions. This would be the world's worst money sermon ever given if 8 and 9 were actually followed by chapter 10. And it ends with his blessings. Now, the section on Paul's ministry, I got the outline for this from Frank Matera's commentary on 2 Corinthians in the New Testament Message series. Frank Matera is a priest of the Diocese of Hartford, Connecticut. He taught at Catholic University when I studied there, and I was fortunate to take a class from him in the theology department. I'm an exegete, he's a biblical theologian, but I learned a lot from him. And so he wrote this, it's put out by Westminster, John Knox, which is a Protestant publishing house, but he and several other Catholic authors have written part of this series on the New Testament library, which I think it shows us that ecumenism is advancing, as is respect for Catholic biblical scholarship. So I got this outline from Frank. He stresses that his ministry is ministry of a new covenant. So there's the first covenant and there's the new covenant. And then he goes into the section from chapter 4 and 5, where he's talking about ministry and its relation to apostolic suffering. Some people are saying Paul can't be a real apostle. Paul can't be blessed by God. Look how much he suffers. And remember Deuteronomistic theology. And then then comes his part on the ministry of reconciliation. But the part on his apostolic suffering, first he talks about life and death in apostolic ministry, and then the present transformation that's taking place, how this suffering is changing him and making him into a better apostle, conforming him to the image of suffering Jesus. And then he looks forward, he's being transformed right now. Then he looks forward to the final transformation at the beginning of chapter 5. And our passage today comes from that. The first 5 verses, he's talking about the resurrection body, which he goes into in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, a whole lot more than he does here. And then our section is about believers longing to be with the Lord. And it's divided into 2 subdivisions. His hope of being clothed over by the resurrection body. It's almost like the resurrection body is a garment that he's going to put on. And then pleasing the Lord in preparation for judgment. And after that, then he goes on to his ministry as apostle, as a ministry of reconciliation. So the first of the subsections, he outlines the main actions in verses 6 to 8 as follows. He says, we are confident and know we are at home in the body, away from the Lord. We live by faith, not by what is seen. And Matera thinks that what we Christians don't see is the risen body of the Lord. Now, Paul claims to have seen the risen Lord, but he doesn't have that with him all the time. It was a one-time experience. We live by faith, not by what is seen. We are confident and prefer to be away from the body at home with the Lord. So Paul's confidence, it frames, oh, I should have highlighted that second one, or underlined that second one. Confidence frames the life he lives. And we are confident. It refers primarily to Paul, secondarily to all others who are involved in apostolic ministry, and also it's the hope is applicable to all believers. This is how Matera takes it. I think he's right. Verses 9 to 10 contain two themes. Because of the confidence that God has given him, Paul strives to please the Lord. So God has given him this confidence that he has in the midst of suffering. So Paul is trying to please the Lord. And then in verse 10, he mentions judgment. This is a transition to the next station. Humanity is alienated from God, and the purpose of apostolic ministry is to reconcile divided humanity to God. And it's Paul is convinced that it's by being reconciled to God ultimately, and only that way can we be reconciled to one another. It's like we human beings can't get our act together and then we can approach God. No, we have to be reconciled to God. Then we can get our act together with each other. Matera's summary of this whole section, Paul is the minister of a new covenant, but he carries the treasure of the gospel and exercises his ministry in an earthen vessel. St. Louis Jesuits have that song, "We hold a treasure not made of gold, in earthen vessels, wealth untold," and so on. In an earthen vessel that is always in danger of being destroyed. The dying of Jesus, however, which he carries in his body by enduring apostolic hardships, paradoxically manifests the life of Jesus. He says, it makes it obvious that anything that good happens, it doesn't come from me. Anything that good happens, it has to come from God's power, because it's obvious to everyone how weak I am. Thus, he is full of confidence because of his faith in the resurrection. For while the outer person is in the process of decaying, the inner person is already being prepared for the fullness of glory. And the fullness of glory will come when Paul's earthly tent-like existence is covered over by the eternal heavenly dwelling place that God will provide, namely the resurrection body. Filled with confidence, Paul strives to please the Lord, before whose judgment seat he must stand. The glory of Paul's new covenant ministry, then, is concealed in his apostolic sufferings. But these sufferings are slowly transforming him from glory to glory, making him more like Christ, until finally he attains the resurrection of the dead. So I'm going to read from Matera's translation here. And for context, I'll go ahead and read the first 5 verses as well. For we know that when our earthly tent-like dwelling is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal dwelling in the heavens, not made by human hands. For in this body we sigh, as we long to be clothed over with our heavenly dwelling. And if indeed we are clothed, we will not be found naked. For while in this tent we sigh, being oppressed, because we do not want to be unclothed, but clothed over, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. The one who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who has given us the Spirit as a pledge. And then our passage begins. Therefore, we are always confident and know that while at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we live by faith and not by what is seen. We are confident and prefer to be away from the body and at home to the Lord. Therefore, we aspire to pleasing him, whether at home or away. For all of us must appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each may receive a recompense corresponding to what he has done in life, whether good or worthless. So, since I've already given us the second reading then, so any questions, comments, or observations? I'll make just one. It was from the end of that. He says he's given us the Spirit as a pledge, and the other translation for that is down payment. And so like when you make the down payment on your house or your car, that's a sign that the rest of the payment is going to come in due course. So Christians, right now, we have, yes, we're still suffering. We don't have the resurrected body yet. We don't see it yet, but we have the Spirit. And the fact that God's Spirit is dwelling in us, giving us this faith, giving us this confidence, this is the down payment that God has made. So that's kind of a peculiar image for the Holy Spirit, but it's Paul's biblical image.
Father, your summary that you read
Uh-huh.
is different than the one that you have printed. Are there the two revised edition and the regular edition summaries, or what's the difference there?
The
summary of Matera?
The summary of,
Matera's summary?
okay,
The one you read is different than what you have in the writing.
I was reading from the writing, I thought.
That's not what I've got.
Okay, now don't confuse, I did not give you his translation in writing. I gave you his summary. Let's see, so the summary is on page, it's on the bottom of page 6 of the notes.
Bottom of page 6. Oh.
That's his summary. Paul is a minister of a new covenant and so on.
Okay, I was looking at the summary comes right before the Gospel of Mark. I thought that's what you're reading from.
Oh.
There's a summary, then you have Father Pat proclaims the second reading from Father Matera's translation.
Right. And for context, I will read his remarks. So that's the summary, and then I give you the reading again. So we had the first reading that from the New American Bible that you read.
Right.
Then we had my presentation, which concluded with Matera's summary of the passage in context. And then I read Matera's translation. And so that's his translation of Paul's Greek.
Okay.
And I did not give you the translation in the notes. I just read it.
Okay, so that would have accounted for it being different than what's written here when you under Matera's summary. the summary that appears right before Mark's gospel, summary of Corinthians. Actually, the summary of 4:7 through 5:10.
Right, I read that. Do you want
And
me
that
to
was
read it
different,
again?
different what I was looking at.
Okay, what I have is Paul is the minister of a new covenant,
Yes,
but he carries the treasure of the gospel.
that's what I have. So is it something going on in my mind that I didn't?
Oh, you know, I'll bet the chemotherapy
It must be,
might have
because
made you check out.
it wasn't completely different, but there were different words and phrases in
And
there.
it's possible that I made some mistakes in
Did
reading.
nobody else have that problem? Am I the only one? Then I'll blame it on
I
chemo.
might very well have made some mistakes. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sometimes you can go out of your mind when you're taking this stuff. I was in a different plane.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Uh, anyone else have any questions or comments here? Well, we're getting short on time, so I'm going to go ahead and stop here.